Let's go into how to create a chiropractic warrior or a strong employee or a very good employee. What are the characteristics, how you can influence them, and why is it important? Well, the reason it's important is the second most important factor for your income after your number one, your knowledge and skill and ability is your staff. That's why it's important. Knowing how to pick, hire, train, and manage staff is going to be the second most important factor to increase your income. And the reason for that is leverage of time. You can't leverage time by yourself. So if it's just you, you're very limited in the income you can make. You hire staff members, first staff member, you can basically every staff member, you can typically increase your practice anywhere from 75 to 125 visits a week. So you can do the math, 100 visits a week at $50 a visit, $5,000. That's $250,000 a year. So that's the power of staff. So it's important not only how to pick staff, which is the single most important, is how to pick staff. 90% of your problems will be from who you picked or who you did not pick. That'll easily be 90% of your problems. So let's go into some staff characteristics and what do we need to do to motivate staff? How to keep staff focused in the practice, promoting in the practice, participating in the practice. Because you do not just want an employee mentality. You do not. So you can do a lot to affect that. Now, if somebody has a bad attitude and they don't want to go there, there's not much you can do. But you can take almost any other person and then integrate them to increase a higher sense of being within the practice. And that's what you want. You want a higher sense of being. You want a higher sense of purpose for that person. And you're the person that's got to take them there. So let's go over some of these parameters. And I'll share with you that like a chart that you can think of it as a visual chart that I used as far as managing staff, motivating staff. So let's go into some of these major factors here. Let me do a screen share. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and start with, these are the topics every chiropractic assistant should know. Now, if you don't know the topics, you can go to the membership site. And I have these in the membership site, and maybe some of these I already have in video. So you can literally just play the videos for your staff. That's partly what that membership site is about. It's to alleviate a lot of your time and effort and to have that bank of videos for training, support, motivation, guidelines, especially with the employees, because it's constant and never ending when you're dealing with the employees. So number one is conviction. That's one of the single most important things you can do. Let's face it, somebody who is a higher conviction is going to be much more in tune to what they do, their job, their activities, etc. Well, you can directly affect their conviction. And so how do we want to, what are the ways to increase their conviction? In other words, we want them to believe totally in what they're doing and why they're doing it. And by the way, that not only will make a difference in their job performance, it'll make a huge difference in their referrals. They don't believe in you and it's just a job, you're not going to get very much referrals from your staff. But when you create conviction with your staff and you tie it to a bonus and you do the training, you're going to get a lot of referrals from staff. So number one, how do you increase conviction? Number three is teaching them in great detail the 3 phases of healing. Why are you doing what you're doing? And remember, one of the most important things to do when you teach staff the 3 phases of healing is teaching them what you don't do. So that's part of that thing we call the triangle of health in the presentation, when we explain that, that that health is based on 3 major factors. It's the mental, nutritional, and physical component. Well, part of that is one of the major parts of that is showing what you don't do. Because remember, one of the best ways to create credibility is to say what you don't do. And that's very important in chiropractic, because the profession does the opposite. And that's why it doesn't have high credibility. It says it can do everything. I just came out of an FCA, Florida Chiropractic Convention. Florida Chiropractic Convention. And they had classes on chiropractors treating cancer. Literally. So it's a huge problem in this profession, and that's what's kept it down for so long. So you better make sure your staff understands the 3 phases of healing, number 1, and how you do what you do and why you do it. And then also go into great detail with how do you know it, go into some of the biomarkers of how you know these different problems when you talk about the 3 phases of healing. So it should be in much greater detail than what you do with a patient. And they should literally be able to explain the 3 phases of healing. That's how well they should know it. That increases conviction significantly. Number 2 is explain the triangle of health, explain the presentation in the triangle of health, and make sure you let them know all the things you don't do and that you refer patients to. That's why we talk about, if the patient has mental issues or if they have chemical issues, we refer them to the proper provider. That creates tremendous credibility. And then also when you go into the, your staff should also know in that presentation that we have, we go into the comparison and contrast between a general practitioner, a physical therapist, and a chiropractor. And we relate it, each of the 3 phases, we relate it to the science of the 3 phases of healing, the pros and cons of each phase with what you do relative to the other providers. That helps create tremendous amount of clarity and distinction of what you do, not only what you do and how you do it and why you do it, but pay a lot of attention to explaining what you don't do. That creates a lot of credibility. Personal experience is a way, whether your personal experience, maybe they've had a personal experience. Remember, you get conviction over 2 ways. One is a personal experience and one is studying it over time. That's the way you increase conviction. And another great way to increase conviction, and we talk about this should happen at every staff meeting, that you should cover a patient's case. In other words, go into, especially if that patient was referred by that staff member. That is huge. That gives tremendous amount of empowerment to the staff member, not just for the $50 for the referral they made, but when the patient's gone through care and you actually explain, here's the mechanism of injury, here's how it started, here's where the positive findings, this is how we knew what the problem was. Based on this problem, we started treating for the inflammatory phase. Here's the positive tests that were in the inflammatory phase that showed pain and inflammation. And so these were the therapies we used to help decrease the pain and inflammation. And then this is what happens in the repair phase. You want to go into all this and personalize the patient, especially a patient if they referred in. That gives them a tremendous feeling of worth that they've helped somebody like this. And then go through the remodel phase with them. and go, here's the test we found. And so this is because of these tests, we're doing these therapies to help with, ranges of motion, active, passive joint ranges of motion in the repair phase. And then you go to the remodel phase and okay, we checked for, this is what happens with the tissue as it heals. Type 3 tissues, when it heals, it's not as elastic, it's not as strong. So we test their mobility, overpressure, joint pressure, strength. And so this is the therapeutic protocol because of that. And then this is how they responded through each phase. And this is where they are now compared to where they came in. That is unbelievable for you to take your staff through that sequence in that grade of detail. It really increases their conviction of what they're doing. Okay, next one is confrontation. You've got, I always say I always had mini confrontation exercises. What are the areas that take the highest amount of confrontation? Need, money, time. How do you increase confrontation? Role playing with micro steps. Now, you're not going to take somebody who has very low confrontation, and this is why when you hire staff members, you've got to be able to evaluate this, because you do not want to hire somebody with low confrontation and try to put them in a position that requires higher confrontation, like marketing. That's just going to be oil and water, and it will not work. So you can affect it to some degree, confrontation. It's not going to be a lot. So the person you pick is the person you're going to kind of start with. So this is one of the categories where you better pick good. Now, conviction is not one of those categories. I can increase their conviction relatively quickly over time. If they don't have any conviction at all and they don't even know what chiropractic is, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. That's not the case with confrontation. These people, we're kind of born with it. We're imprinted with it. You're not going to dramatically change somebody's confrontation in a short period of time. So you better be aware of it and know how to pick it when you're hiring. But you still want to make sure your staff, if they're dealing with high confrontation topics like scheduling patients, recalls, collecting money, marketing, you want to make sure you've hired somebody who already has confrontation. And then you can work on it from them. And the best way is role playing with micro steps. That's the best way. We talked about the 3 phases of healing: inflammation, repair, remodel, the objectives and the therapeutics. Go into great detail with way more than the patient and use patients as examples. You'll get tremendous amount of credibility, number one, with your staff. Is what will happen. What's the difference between chiropractic versus medical providers relative to the 3 phases of healing? We talked about that. That's in the presentation that we also give. But you definitely want to explain the 3 phases of healing relative, and just use an example of like a general practitioner, physical therapist, and a chiropractor, and then explains the pros and cons and the differences through each of the 3 phases of healing. That's huge. Now, it's real good that they understand the Wilk versus AMA case. And if you don't know it, you might want to look it up or watch a video. And I actually have the content and the video in the membership site. But they need to understand why medicine has treated chiropractic and treats chiropractic the way it does. They need to understand that. So that's the Wilk versus the AMA case, and why medical doctors don't refer, and why there's a negative name recognition. Well, part of it's the Wilk case, but obviously part of it is chiropractors claiming they can do everything, like treat cancer. Well, I taught my staff that. I taught my staff, hey, the AMA did all this damage. They got sued and they lost, but there's already a lot of damage was done. And then the profession itself continues the damage by marketing that it can do everything under the sun. They need to know this. Builds tremendous credibility. Role of medications, especially neuromusculoskeletal medications, the top 3 pain medications, muscle relaxers, anti-inflammatories. And we're going to relate to the medications relative to the 3 phases of healing. And we're going to stress the positive and negative. And what you don't want to do is just say everything is bad about medication. Like, no, there's nothing wrong with taking pain pills, muscle relaxers, and anti-inflammatories in the inflammatory phase. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're not taking it long enough to have any negative detrimental side effects. Now, taking them over a long period of time can be lethal. So we can't just be, and that's one of the things you don't want to be, is just everything's about medicine is bad, like most chiropractors talk. And chiropractors don't understand that destroys your credibility with normal people. No, you got to put it into perspective. What's the perspective of these typical medications? So I'm like, yeah, they're fine in inflammatory phase. Do we want to be using them regularly for life and look at the side effects and the causes of the different problems as it results the medication? So yeah, we need to know that too. But you just don't want to, be one of those people that everything about medicine is bad. You look like the kook, not them. Subluxations. That's a big topic. You've got to be able to explain the somatovisceral reflex. What happens with the autonomic nervous system potential with an adjustment to the different visceral organs? You got to be able to explain that. And then the relative percent in the market, that's a very small percent. But what's the big problem? It's a paradigm shift. That's the big problem. Even if it worked, it's still a problem. I say it all the time. Pizza Hut can make computers if they wanted to. They got the money. Does that mean you're going to buy a computer from Pizza Hut? So there has to be an understanding of this. It has to be put into perspective without being a zealot. In other words, just, everything about medicine is bad. No, put all this into its perspective. That creates a tremendous amount of credibility and authority is what that does.